What I like about the franchise model is there's systems. You can follow the recipe, you can follow the systems. They have marketing in place, they have everything in place. So once you have all that down, right, and you're built out your total sources and uses, franchise fees, inventory, working capital, startup costs, inventory, equipment, all that, right? And that becomes your total project cost and also the SBA fees. SBA doesn't they don't vet the franchise on if it's a good franchise or not. Just be aware of that. They're just basically, it's been expedited so we can get financing. If it's not approved on the list, then you can't get SBA financing, or it's very difficult, I should say.
I was thinking about starting my own non-franchise coffee shop, but the more planning I do, the more I think I should start looking at franchise concepts. However, the startup costs seem a little high. What is your opinion on what I should do? Thanks, Frank.
Well, Frank, if you want a system to follow, like plug and play, a business in a box, that's what a franchise really is about. If you have a unique idea for a coffee store non-franchise, then maybe that's the way you want to go. But what I like about the franchise model is there's systems. You can follow the recipe, you can follow the systems. They have marketing in place, they have everything in place. Plus, you can also talk to other franchisees within the system and understand how they're running their business, being successful. So it really depends on you. If you have a unique business idea, then maybe a startup is the right. But as far as being fundable, it is easier to get higher leverage when you're buying into a proven business model, such as a franchise that has 200 or 300 units out there. So that's really the determination. You might have a background in the coffee business. You might understand how to get the coffee, how to brew it, where to get the cups, what point of sale POS system are you going to use, where are you going to put the coffee shop. Well, this is what a franchise may help you with. So I would say, depending on what your background is now, if you have never run a business before, maybe a franchise model would be the best fit for you.
Hey, Beau, I'm looking at purchasing a new PJ's Coffee franchise. My question is, what is the process for obtaining SBA 7A financing? From what I gather, it looks like total startup costs would be total estimated PJ's Coffee of New Orleans franchise cost of $406,000 to $1,024,000. Thanks.
Okay, very good. I think that was Thomas. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to check the SBA directory. And I believe PJ's is on there because I've seen this before and we've looked into financing a few. So that would be the check mark first. And then what we'd go into is obviously there's a range depending on locations of the total project cost. But typically, once we looked at it's approved on the directory, then it comes down to a component of your credit worthiness, your borrowing ability, and your equity that you would have to come up with. So typically, on a franchise startup, most banks are going to overlay and say you need anywhere from 15 to 20%. Although we have some banks we work with which will allow for 10% equity injection. So each bank is different. They overlay these franchise concepts depending on the franchise itself, how many unit count, how many units. PJ's is pretty established. I think they have over 100 units if I remember correctly. So an established franchise concept, usually the banks like those more than, say, a franchise concept that only has 10 or 15 units. So anyways, we add up total project costs. We look at your projections. So typically the franchisor will give you their business plan, their template, worksheet, and then you're going to complete it based on your location and your square footage and your traffic count, essentially. And then you're going to build out your pro forma based on their tools and their data points that they give you. You're going to do your own due diligence, obviously, as you're talking to other franchise owners within the concept. Part of your due diligence process will be for you to go out and do a discovery day and also do what they call validation, where you're going to go and you're going to talk or even visit other franchisees at their stores, and they're going to provide some input to you. So once you have all that down, right, and you're built out your total sources and uses, franchise fees, inventory, working capital, startup costs, inventory, equipment, all that, right? That's your total sources and uses. We stack on maybe some working capital in there, so you don't go in with no working capital. So we put some working capital first few months of employees' salaries in there. and that becomes your total project cost and also the SBA fees. So that would be your total project cost, and typically 10 to 20%, depending on the bank, depending on your strength as a borrower, is what the equity injection is going to look like. So when we talk about your strength, what strengthens you as the borrower would be because this is there's going to be a collateral shortfall. They're going to look for additional collateral. So anytime there's a collateral shortfall, SBA guidelines say you need to look for additional collateral. That could be a primary residence, that could be a secondary residence, it could be investment property. So if you had a lot of equity there and you're strong in that capacity, they might put a second lien on that primary residence with $500,000 or $1 million of equity, right? That strengthens it. You have a 750 credit score. You're going to still keep your W-2 job, at least for the short term. This all strengthens it, right? You make $300,000 a year doing your sales job. You're also going to have this business. That all strengthens the deal. And then also it comes down to the actual vertical, the franchise concept itself. Does it have longevity? Does it have a lot of concepts? Is it a well-liked franchise company that these banks like? And coffee shops seem to do it. Restaurants are a little hit and miss. So at the end of the day, circling this all back, it's going to depend. But if you're strong and the concept's strong, 10% equity injection is probably where you're going to look.
All right. Hi, Beau. This one comes from Louise and Mitch. I am a longtime fan of your show. My husband and I are both full-time employees. My husband works in tech and I am in HR. We have a small portfolio of rental properties, and at some point, we'd like to quit our jobs and run a business. So far, we have been exploring starting a coffee shop franchise. Currently, we have an interest in the following franchise concepts. However, just to note, we are just starting our search, so this list could change. We have on our list Scooter's Coffee, PJ's Coffee, and Cafe Bean or Cafe Bene. Not sure how to say that. We would like to utilize our great credit and income and assets to finance as much as possible, as we are also trying to grow our real estate portfolio and believe in good debt. We are looking for some guidance and would love to hear you talk about options out there and maybe what we might start to look for as we dive deeper into the process. Thanks.
All right. Thanks for the question, Louise. So I think all of these, I did a quick check and I'm familiar with two of them, that they're all on the SBA directory. So that means they've been vetted to be approved, which essentially means they're SBA eligible, but SBA doesn't they don't vet the franchise on if it's a good franchise or not. Just be aware of that. They're just basically, it's been expedited so we can get financing. If it's not approved on the list, then you can't get SBA financing, or it's very difficult, I should say. So that being said, those three franchise concepts appear to be on the SBA approved list. So I think your next steps is really just kind of go through all the coffee shop franchises. A lot of people come into the franchise business thinking they want to do some kind of like brick and mortar location, and they end up changing. But let's just say that you've pretty much, this is what you want to do. You like the business model. I think you got to look at 4 to 6 concepts. And as you progress, you're going to go through all of the FDDs. You're going to pull up the websites. You're going to really kind of do some due diligence. The FDD is really the franchise disclosure document. It's going to tell you how many units are open. It's basically 23 key points where you're going to kind of compare and see what's going on with the franchise. Are they growing? How many units do they have? How many units close down each year? How many how many new units are going? So you really want to see what it looks like. You want to see where, depending on where you're located, are there any franchise concepts in your area? Maybe you can go visit them and see how they're doing. Then you're going to basically do a deep dive. You're going to typically work with a franchise consultant or advisor. They're going to help you go through all of this, the documents and so forth. They're going to put you in contact. Once you identify the franchise concept, you want to go down and do all your due diligence. You're going to do a discovery day with that franchise concept, where you either go into their corporate office or you do it virtually through Zoom. And you're going to go through the whole process to see if it's something you want to do. Now, obviously, what you wrote is that you're looking to leverage and you're looking to get SBA financing. So I would say that we'd be looking for a concept that is approved, that we can do SBA financing for, because you're going to get the highest leverage that way. There's also some other additional financing that's non-SBA that we could look at. So those would be the best way to kind of start the process. As far as SBA, each bank that's an SBA PLP, they're a preferred lender. Typically who you're going to work with, a bank or credit union that's a PLP. What I can do on my end is I can help you facilitate the whole process here, but what you want to do is kind of narrow down the search and figure out what the total costs are, because when you're going through all the disclosure documents, they're going to give you a document which itemizes what you can expect each of the costs, the build outs, the marketing costs, the royalty fees. So you're going to know what you're going to need roughly up front, or at least a range, because we got to know what the total project cost is going to look like. Obviously, if it's a cafe or a coffee shop, you're going to have to identify the location and figure out the rent costs and the TIs, what it's going to take to build out the location per the franchise specification. So once you get all that accomplished, then we have our total project costs that we can figure out. And this type of financing, depending on your strength as borrowers, if you have additional collateral, you can finance up to 90% of the total project cost. Now, most banks with franchises, even though the SOP says we need at least 10% equity injection, so that's 90% financing, some banks will say, hey, we can do this at 80% or 85%. So we'd have to navigate that water and figure out what the best program would be. Typically, these programs are based on the Wall Street Journal Prime plus a margin. So it's a variable rate. It adjusts quarterly based on Wall Street Journal Prime. So that's all kind of the negotiation processes as we go further. But essentially, it is possible to get 90% of total project cost financed. I would note to you that if there's a collateral shortfall, which on this, it sounds like there will be, that they will look for additional collateral. So if you had a rental property, let's say, and there was a $250,000 collateral shortfall, they could want to put a secondary lien on one or two of your rental properties, just so you know how the SBA 7A process works. Now, sometimes we're able to work with equipment finance companies who will finance all the equipment needed and most of the build out. So there's other options, but usually SBA is the most advantageous, especially with these coffee franchise concepts, because they're usually a couple $100,000, if not greater.
Meet Beau Eckstein, the driving force behind Business Ownership Coach, unlocking the path to business ownership. Visit www.businessownershipcoach.com. Thrive with Business Ownership Coach.
Hey guys, Beau Eckstein here. If you enjoyed what you saw, please subscribe to this channel. We talk all things financing. I've been in the lending industry for over 20 years, and I'm happy to answer your questions and provide great content.